Hello again. My name is Eric, and I'm here continuing a conversation on executive functions. In my last video, I described my own personal accounts on how the lack of executive functions really gave me a false perception of myself scholastically. This carried all the way through high school and even into college until I started basically deriving for myself the needed behaviors to succeed in college, particularly with a major like physics. And what I found out over the last few years of teaching, particularly in academia, that most students have no idea what executive functions are. Not only that, most schools may have started to address executive functions in the late few years, but most schools have no set-aside executive functions class, curriculum, or anything like that. So it doesn't exist. Yet on the contrary, schools will pile on more academia, more math, AP classes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have the vehicle that can carry and monitor these things, most students are set up for failure. I've seen this countless times, and I see it all the time, not only in the schools I've worked for, but also in the students I teach, and they tell me how their schools are run. Now, some teachers are aware of these things, and they do build certain aspects of their classroom management with executive functions. I know I did. I had certain things due at a certain time. We followed certain procedures every time we showed up, and it forced the student to make sure things were done on time or done ahead of class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But even that's not really enough. Executive functions are the kind of things that need to be like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, picking up after yourself. You do them daily and daily and daily and refine them that they become a habit. They become how we approach scholastic material, how we budget time out. There's one thing I learned in college, as with anything in life, but we'll keep it on academia. When you're less stressed, you learn better. So most students and most people, regardless of school or not, end up procrastinating, and I was no different. But when I was in college and I would have a test coming up, to bring down the stress, I would start studying a few days earlier. That way I could cover everything I was aware of covering, and I would reduce the stress. It didn't go all the way, but I would reduce the stress so I could maximize my potential on the exam. This is all one aspect of executive functions. So what I'm getting at is the need for executive functions is incredibly great. There is really no, as I mentioned earlier, there is really nothing in schools that addresses this directly to the students. Not on the scale that I've learned to do with my students. Even with my students, I see them usually on average about twice a week, and we go through these processes to update them. But it's the kind of thing that really should be done daily. It doesn't take long, but it really should be done daily. And this leads into the fact that most professional development in school, now these discussions are starting to come up more and more. When I remember being in meetings, we would talk about students and their skills and skill gaps. Yes, we would always talk about the academic skill gaps, but there was also a lot of them where they didn't know how to organize themselves. They didn't know how to budget time. They lost materials. They didn't know where things were at. They had no idea what their homework was, even though nowadays most curriculums are online on some fashion or another. Most schools have the grades aligned, their homework aligned. So everything is done via online, so there's really no need. But what I found is that most students can end up getting overwhelmed. They go online and they see all the stuff they have to do, and it's kind of like in their mind it piles up. They see their backpacks full of work or things that they know they haven't done, and it just becomes like a huge wall that they can't overcome, and then they just disconnect and walk the other way. That builds up a perception, once again, that they are not good in school. I'm just not made for school. This can't be more further from the truth. As I've mentioned in the last video, I have found most students can do extremely well in school and will actually enjoy material, even material they may have never thought they would enjoy. But it does take a certain way to manage not only time, but manage the material, formatting issues, how you write notes, how you write papers, and all those little things that really hone in the quality and the learning process. So, as we move through schools and their lack of executive functions, generally speaking, this leads to one last spot, which is at home with mom and dad. And in the past, this is probably what was just implicitly assumed, that mom and dad would make sure their son or daughter sat down every day at a certain time, got their homework done. Mom and dad might help them do the homework, might show them how to organize it, buy them stuff, make sure there's a spot where they study, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the executive functions. However, from my generation, which was the raising of the TV, we used to say, and to the present, both moms and dads are working. They're very busy. They come home tired, and the last thing they can do is sit down and teach these things to their children, especially if their children are out doing extracurricular activities or doing whatever. So the need is even greater than it was before. And to be polite, to say this politely, it also assumes that parents know what executive functions are. It assumes they know how to organize things and maximize their students' education, so they don't fall behind. They don't fall through the skill gaps. Because once again, most teachers don't teach this stuff. We are aware of it, and it's not even, it's in my experience, it feels like it was just something, I don't mean to diminish it, it feels like something that we know about but hasn't been really refined and organized in terms of a curriculum to be able to give to students to upload, and then they can adjust it to themselves. So the need is incredibly great. And in a time now where there's so much technological distractions across the board, especially for the newer generations with cell phones and all this stuff, executive functions, time management, and the proper environment to study are incredibly necessary to be able to maximize the student's potential scholastically. And remember, executive functions are not just for school. These are going to be the same kind of behaviors that students will use when they finish college and they go to work and they have to manage their time between themselves and their family, personal time, vacation time, and all the chores of life that we all have to manage. So, in a nutshell, the need for executive functions is very great and is very important that students learn these things regardless of how old they are or how young they are. Thank you very much for listening to this conversation again. Have a great day. And remember, enjoy the process.